I woke up slow. It was rare to have such a peaceful sleep, or to even wake up in a way that was not abrupt. I tried to move and realized that I couldn't. I opened my eyes and realized that Alpha King Riss's arms had me locked in against his very naked body. Oh God, what if he touched me like that? What if he was just like every other person I had known in my old pack? "You're awake." His chest vibrated against my chest, and his voice was husky with sleep. I looked at him as he gently ran his hand through my hair. "How do you feel?" he asked, turning me toward him more. I shrugged. I actually felt okay, but I was so confused. Why was he holding me like that and so calm about it? But he reluctantly let go after a moment and got out of the bed, and I immediately missed his warmth. I grabbed the chalkboard and drew a question mark. "Don't worry," he teased in a manner that surprised me. "If I had done anything, you would know." And then to top it off, he winked at me before continuing in a more serious tone. "You've actually been unconscious for several days now. No doubt a reaction from the mark you carry. You were fevering really bad, but when the fever broke, you had the opposite problem. You got really cold, and your breathing got weird, and I thought body heat might help you warm up, and it did." I nodded. I was glad to know that nothing had happened, but I also could tell that despite his calm demeanor about it, his patience was waning. He held back this time, but would he again? What if I was never ready? Would he be the reason I was unconscious for 4 days next time, or worse? "Since you've been unconscious for 4 days, you probably desperately want a bath." I nodded a little uncertainly, unsure of what it was he exactly meant by that, but I could feel the dried sweat from my fever stickily coating my skin. Suddenly, I was being lifted from the bed and carried into the bath, my chalkboard still in my hand, and I gasped in surprise. I drew a question mark quickly, though it looked a little funky since we were moving. I didn't even have the chance to show him before he was sitting me gently on the side of the tub. "If it isn't blaringly obvious," he said as he turned the water on for the tub, "I am running you a bath. Do you like your water super hot, hot, or lukewarm?" I held up a 3. I had had enough boiling water on my skin to last a lifetime. I grabbed my chalkboard and tried to figure out how to tell him I could do it alone. I drew myself, and then I drew a door with him on the other side. And then I wrote, "I'm fine." I did know how to spell both of those words. He smirked slightly but ignored me. He pulled at the hem of my shirt, looking at me for permission. Whatever he saw apparently gave him the answer he wanted as he pulled my shirt off. I was surprised at how gentle he was, but I hated being exposed. I hated how ugly my body was, how scarred it was. My old wounds were still so painful. His hands were then on my hips, tugging at my waistband, and I moved, allowing him to take them off. Despite my whole body being on display for him, he surprised me by keeping his eyes locked with mine the whole time. Once I was fully undressed and very uncomfortable, he lifted me into the tub. I once again was surprised at his tenderness. I wondered if I would ever truly be used to kindness. "Everything you need should be on the ledge," he stated, backing away from the tub. "I will be downstairs. Come find me when you're done." I nodded, but his back was already turned from me, so I knew he hadn't seen it. I used the time I had alone to quickly wash up and process what was happening. The Alpha King was someone who seemed so intimidating to the outside eye, so I was thoroughly confused with what was happening. I quickly got dressed, combed my hair, and I was out the door, so I wouldn't keep him waiting. I was on the stairs when I very nearly ran straight into the Alpha King's twin, Caleb. "Oh, I'm sorry," he stated with a little smirk as he threw his arm around me, pulling me uncomfortably close. "Didn't mean to get in your way, little goose. How are you doing? I heard you had a rough few days through the grapevine." I frowned and tried to pull away. Why was he calling me goose? It wasn't like I knew him well, and I had no idea how to even react. "What are you doing, Caleb?" Dr. Sonnet asked, and I had never been so relieved to see him before. "Just chatting with our dear brother's special bride." "But what makes her so special?" he stated, winking at me. "The way he acts, you would think she was the one he's been looking for." "Knock it off," Dr. Sonnet snapped at his brother, who finally let me go. "Come on, Grace. Riss is waiting for us in his office." I nodded, and the three of us headed down the stairs together. but the brothers bickered amongst themselves, but I could hardly hear them. It was just muffled noise to me. Dr. Sonnet knocked on the office door of what I assumed was the Alpha King's office, which was confirmed when I heard his familiar voice call out, "Come in." I stepped in his office and saw that his beta was sitting in the chair across from him, and there were several other chairs around, making me think they might have recently just concluded a meeting. "Grace, glad you could join us." The beta smiled gently at him. I remembered him vaguely from that day the Alpha King had come to my old pack. He had driven us here. I nodded, feeling uncomfortable in a room so full of men, especially with the way Caleb was staring at me blatantly in front of his brother. "So Grace," the Alpha King started, "we have decided to go back to your old pack." And with those few words, they incited panic immediately. I tried to not pyral, but that was nearly impossible. He was sending me back. My biggest fear was coming true. I wouldn't survive going back. They would kill me. There's no way I wouldn't die. They would say I embarrassed them by being seen by the Alpha King, and embarrassed them again when I wasn't good enough for him. Ugh. I should have tried harder. I should have cooked and cleaned and offered my body more willingly. I should have made myself invaluable. I spent too much time unconscious and injured for me to have really done much, but it hurt to know that he didn't care enough to keep me. My most recent experience must have crossed the line. I mean, I had been unconscious for 4 days. Just because I woke up to him holding me clearly didn't mean he wanted me as a bride anymore, despite what his brother had said just a little while ago. "Grace, are you still with us?" I looked up, tears brimming in my eyes, and realized he was standing right in front of me. I nodded, hoping that I wasn't wearing my emotions on my face. "You do realize that I'm not sending you back, right, Grace?" His voice was serious as his hand cupped my face, forcing me to look him in the eyes. I blinked in surprise. He wasn't sending me back? He stepped back and leaned against his desk, putting a distance that I didn't love between us. As I was saying, Beta Leon, Caleb and I will be going back to the Red Blood Pack to personally handle everything. I looked at him in surprise, and so did his twin before Caleb schooled his features into a look of disdain. I also felt confused at the announcement since the Alpha King and Caleb didn't really seem to get along, and as far as I knew, Caleb didn't have a title like Dr. Sonnet did. A part of me once again wondered what had happened between them for them to be like this. "Why?" Caleb asked. "So I can feed you to them when they decide to try and feast on us being there." Alpha King Riss responded sarcastically. I snuck a glance at Caleb, who was rolling his eyes before looking back at the Alpha King. "There is a lot that I believe the Red Blood Pack is hiding. I can't pretend that I'm not worried that they are plotting our demise as we speak. We took what they were hiding, which was you, Grace. For whatever reason, they were desperately trying to keep you contained and under their total control. I want to know what they have now that's keeping them feeling so secure." The three men talked for a little bit longer, discussing theories and thoughts that honestly I didn't care about. The way the Alpha King had just said everything made me feel like I was some secret weapon or something. Now, I think that has been enough excitement for the time being. Come on, Grace, let's get you back into bed. You still need lots of rest. The Alpha King said, pulling me out of my thoughts. I nodded, and the Alpha King placed his hand on the small of my back as he escorted me back to my room. "I'm sorry for scaring you," the Alpha King said once we reached the door. "It's okay," I wrote on my chalkboard. "Is there a specific reason I smell my brother on you, Grace?" I could tell he was trying to be patient, but the words came out as a growl. My eyes went wide, and I quickly erased my chalkboard and tried to figure out how to explain what exactly happened, but my mind felt blank. I quickly drew a stick figure representing me and a stick figure representing the Alpha King, and then drew his two brothers in a circle around us, and then wrote, "We will be family," but I didn't quite know how to spell family. The Alpha King glanced at the board, and I could see the anger on his face as he pulled me close to him. "I don't want you hanging around him, Grace. He's bad knee." His voice trailed off, and his eyes sort of glazed over. I wondered if he was trying to find the right words to tell me of his anger as he started muttering to himself, making absolutely no sense. "Grace," he said after a long moment. Whatever you do, do not leave this room. I will come back for you, but do not leave this room. Understand? I looked at him in confusion, but before I could even ask what was going on, he was gone. A scream from outside drew my attention away from the Alpha King's abrupt exit, and I turned toward the window. I let out a small squeal as I saw a giant creature being dragged out of the woods by a group of wolves. The creature seemed to have the upper half of a wolf, but the lower half of a human. It had to be at least 8 feet tall and was fighting the wolves with everything it had. It was swinging their massive claws in large swoops at the wolves as they tried to pull him further into the clearing. The way they were moving made it seem like maybe they were trying to keep it alive. 2 all-black wolves sprinted into the battle at full speed. They seemed to be circling the group of wolves and the creature, appearing to be assessing the situation. They were clearly the largest ones out there, besides the monster, but they didn't really appear to be helping much. However, when one of the wolves that was dragging the creature went flying, hitting a tree trunk with a thud, I could almost hear from here. One of the large black wolves went for the kill shot, biting his neck and ripping off his head. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God! I bit back a scream as the head rolled toward the other black wolf, effectively ending the battle. My body shook with fear, and I tried to breathe through the panic. What was that thing? I ducked away from the window and sat next to the bed on the floor. I didn't want to see anymore. What the heck did I just witness? That was nuts. Was there only one? Were there more coming? Was it coming to take me away? The silence scared me more than the commotion. The silence gave my head the opportunity to run wild with worst-case scenarios. I just couldn't seem to wrap my head around what had just happened, and my body was shaking with anxiety that I just couldn't shake. I sat on the floor for, I don't know how long, until a knock on the door startled me. I stood up as quickly as my body would allow me, and I grabbed the lamp that stood next to the bedside table. I didn't know where to position myself in the room. I felt like I shouldn't be in front of the window, but I also didn't want to be trapped in a corner, and the bed was in the middle of the room, which also felt like a hindrance. There were no safe options that I could figure out, and this creature would probably be able to smell me no matter where I was. I couldn't seem to calm my racing heart to think clearly. Grace, it's me. The Alpha King called out when I didn't answer after his first few knocks. I moved hesitantly toward the door and opened it with shaking hands. The Alpha King stood in front of me in all his glory. He was shirtless, and I couldn't help but once again notice his bulging muscles. He was perfect. The moon goddess must have really worked hard on him. Even now, with his hair disheveled and covered in splattered blood, he looked like a little slice of heaven instead of the intimidating Alpha King I knew he could be. We both stared at each other for a long moment before he said, "The danger has passed. You're safe now. You don't have to be afraid anymore." I nodded hesitantly, making room for him to walk into the room if he wanted. I wondered if he was the large black wolf I had seen some minutes ago. I tried to ignore the question, though, and shifted my thoughts to the things that really mattered. I grabbed my chalkboard and began to draw the creature and a question mark. Alpha King Riss looked at my chalkboard and frowned as he entered my room. "What was that creature? That's what you asking?" he asked a little incredulously, which I didn't quite understand. "I'm going to go take a shower, and then we can talk about it," he said after a moment. I nodded and sat in the chair in the corner, still holding the lamp as he disappeared into the bathroom. I knew the lamp probably wouldn't do me much good, but it made me feel more secure, especially with the Alpha King not in the room with me, even though he was right through the bathroom door if I needed him. Alpha King Reese came out of the bathroom with only a towel wrapped around his waist, and I soaked in his now clean appearance, which was just as handsome as the guy who came in disheveled from a fight. The way the water glistened on his skin made my heart skip a beat. The worst part was that he seemed to know exactly what he was doing to me. The little smirk on his face said it all as he disappeared into the closet. When he came out of the closet, he had on sweats and a hoodie, almost as if to say, "You saw it, but can't have it," in a teasing banter type of way. I regretted having noticed his looks in the first place. It had been an unnecessary distraction from what was going on. There had been a freaking monster in our backyard just 20 minutes ago. I flashed my chalkboard at Reese again, demanding my question to be answered this time. He looked at me in surprise at my ferocity, but responded, "I have absolutely no idea what that thing was, Grace. I have come across a lot of shifters and weird creatures in my day, and none have ever looked even remotely similar to that thing. I have a team currently scouring our library right now, and several people in other packs that I trust also searching for any hint of what the creature was. But it attacked my pack. It had to die." "Scared?" I wrote on the chalkboard, asking how he felt. He looked shocked that I would ask him, and I felt uncomfortable again, wishing I hadn't asked anything. "I wouldn't say scared," he admitted finally, "but I also would be lying if I said it didn't put me on edge. I'm worried about the pack's safety. Your safety. How it got so far into our territory without anyone noticing. There are too many things I don't have answers for right now, and I can't ease the pack's worries about anything." I could see how much it pained him to not have answers, and I felt the same anxiety about not having them as well. But I also knew I was with the most victorious, vicious alpha there was. He didn't get his crown without some blood on his hands, so I also had all the confidence in the world he would figure it out before it was too late. I got lost in my thoughts for a minute, but when I looked up, he was staring at me with that slight smirk I was growing accustomed to. I drew a question mark on my board and looked at him, wondering why he was staring at me the way he was. "That lamp," there was a trace of laughter in his voice, "is not going to protect you from literally anything." I felt my heat rise to my cheeks. I hadn't even realized I was still holding it. I quickly put it down, back in the space it belonged, and tried not to die of embarrassment. "Don't worry, Gracie," he said, the nickname making my heart flutter. "I will train you. We will make you a tough warrior out of you yet. You'll never have to fear others again." He promised. "I will train you myself." His promise took me by surprise, but I didn't say anything. There was no way I could match the Alpha King's power. "Don't worry," he smirked. "I can control my strength, Grace. I won't hurt you." I touched the scar subconsciously on my stomach. How would my body ever be able to do what I needed it to do? It couldn't even heal right. I could never protect myself before. Even with training, I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to do that. "Are you in pain?" Alpha King Reese asked with a frown. He was staring right at my hand, touching a large scar across my stomach. I shook my head no. I was fine. There was always pain, but it was nothing like it used to be, and that scar had been long healed. It just looked ugly now. A sign of weakness. A sign of old humiliations and never being good enough to even exist. I had often wished I didn't exist. The Alpha King knelt in front of me, pulling my hands off my stomach and into his body. "Those scars you have, Grace, they are yours and yours alone. They are your battle scars from wars you didn't ask to fight in. They are your story to tell to who and when you want. You have gone through hell and back, Gracie, and you have more strength than most people in this world. Think of them as a symbol of your new beginning, the one where you actually get to heal. The one where you don't have to be afraid anymore. They are a part of you, so be proud that you have made it as far as you have. They are a sign of your strength, your resilience, your power. You never have to let anyone take your power ever again." I tried to breathe, but it felt hard. No one had ever said such kind, powerful words to me before. No one had ever told me I was strong for having to have endured what was just my life. I had always just existed and endured. I didn't even know what I could say to that. I couldn't imagine being the strong warrior he seemed to be making me out to be. But for him, I wanted to try and be everything he saw. For him, I seemed to be willing to do just about anything. The next few days passed without incident. I stayed mostly in my room, and Alana came to visit a few times. She brought some books each time for us to practice reading and writing. It was a lot of her saying a word, pointing to where it was on the paper, and me practicing writing it. She had a lot of patience because we worked on simple words. She also brought up a friend one day whose name was Sam. Sam was deaf, so he used ASL with his family and close friends to communicate. Alana was honest that she and Sam weren't close, so she didn't know many signs, but she saw an opportunity for us both to learn, and Sam was happy to help. And I was grateful for the company. I had never really had friends before, and it wasn't really till now that I truly saw the appeal. I sat in the dining area eating breakfast by myself. I always sat in the corner by the window. I loved looking out at all the trees, especially because it was fall now and the leaves were slowly changing colors. I loved the contrast of the orange and yellow against the still very green grass. It always took my breath away. I spent most of my day there. I was sketching with a pack of colored pencils I had found in the kitchen. When the dining room emptied out, I wanted to breathe some of the fresh air. I opened the back door and sat in the doorway. I was never allowed out of my old pack house, but sometimes, when no one was around, I would sit in the doorway for a change of scenery. I made sure to never cross the line, and I only did it when I wasn't expected to do anything or be anywhere. I smiled as I saw the kids in the distance getting out of school. Some ran and some walked, and the wind carried their laughter. I had never been to school or gotten to be carefree like that. But I wished I had. I used to imagine it as a child. I used to dream I could live the way they did. "What are you doing?" I turned to see who was talking and quickly got to my feet. "Dr. Sonnet, hello," I greeted him a little breathlessly. "I've told you," he smiled. "It's Sawyer to you. But seriously, why are you just sitting in the doorway?" "Fresh air," I wrote on my chalkboard. "You know you can go outside, right?" he asked. "The danger has passed, there's no sign of any more monsters, and we've upped security along our borders and in them." My eyes widened. I could go outside? I had never been allowed outside alone before. I quickly wrote on my board, "It's okay?" Sawyer muttered the words as he read it and looked at me in confusion. "Of course, it's okay. You are not a prisoner, Grace. You can go outside any time you want. Why would you even ask that? Were you not allowed outside before?" "Yes, old pack," I wrote on my board. "That's awful." Sawyer said as a look of disgust crossed his, "You can go out any time you want. Why don't you go ahead? I can keep an eye on things if that makes you more comfortable." I shook my head no, hesitantly, as a lot of the school children headed this way. "It's safe, Grace. Despite the fact that my brother is known as being ruthless, this pack takes care of its own. Everyone protects everyone. We have built a foundation of loyal, united members." I nodded finally and took a step outside. Everyone around smiled or was kind. I could do this, but I wasn't officially a part of this pack, and I worried that when it came down to it, would anyone choose to protect me? And if they didn't, would it even matter? Freedom seemed to be worth everything to me, and I ran out into the open, ready to explore everything. I couldn't wait to see what fun could be found in the place I had never been allowed. I sat in my office and ran a hand tiredly through my hair. How had I been searching for days and finding absolutely nothing in regard to this monster? There was nothing on how it got through, no noticeable scent to track, no ideas on where even to look. There was nothing in any book. There was no information from any of my stronger alliances. I was coming up completely empty, no matter what avenue I tried, and it was beyond frustrating. There was a loud knock on my office door, pulling me out of my thoughts. "Come in," I called out, knowing full well that it was my beta at the door. "This is some crazy shit," Leon announced as he walked in, slamming the door behind him and plopping into the chair on the other side of my desk. "You found nothing either?" I asked tiredly. This whole thing had me feeling worn and old. "Nope, not a single thing. Why don't we go back to our original plan? Go back to the Red Blood Pack. They are definitely hiding stuff." "No," I said firmly. "That monster was no coincidence. Maybe it was them, trying to see if they could breach our borders. Maybe it was a way to draw us out of our territory in search of answers. I have no idea the actual point of what happened, but I have an increasing suspicion that it involves Grace. What they want with her, I have no idea, but it's not a coincidence that she comes to us and within a couple weeks, a random monster shows up. I cannot leave her right now without the utmost protection, and part of that secure protection is me." "So what is the plan, Alpha?" Leon asked, knowing I was rarely wrong about these things. "I need you to find that stupid witch, or any witch to start. It's rarely a good thing when witches are involved. Meeting with Sandra gave us a few places to start, but it also left us with more questions than answers. There is little we can do until we find more answers. So whatever we have to do, acquire me a freaking witch. Leon nodded. We both understood the severity of the situation. If we didn't get some answers soon, our pack would stay vulnerable, and as the king pack, vulnerability was not an option. Leon stood up, mumbling something about he had to go make a phone call, and I took the time to just breathe for a second. I knew the more I tried to force answers, the less likely they were to come. I looked out the window when I heard kids' laughter. To my surprise, Grace was standing in a wildflower field. There were 3 or 4 kids near her, and I was surprised to see how much she was seemingly enjoying herself. The kids were picking flowers and putting them on her head as they all frolicked around the field. It was sweet. They then started playing a game, and they started moving toward the forest. I immediately panicked. I stood up from my desk and raced to the back door as my wolf just told me to. Go, go, go! I needed to get to her before something bad happened. I needed to warn her not too far, and her being out of my sight for even 10 seconds felt like too much time. I would have completely blown by Sawyer if he didn't reach out and grab my shirt, forcing me back. Let go, I growled at him. No, he responded with a trace of laughter in his voice. Sawyer, I'm not kidding, I have to get to. Grace? He finished my sentence for me. Yes, I bit out. Yay, I know, and I'm telling you as your brother, no, you are not going to Grace right this second. That she is having fun for probably the first time in her life, and you are not going to march over there and ruin it for her. Sawyer answered calmly, making me freeze. She's too close to the forest. I tried, and what if she gets hurt? This is good for her. Sawyer answered, letting go of my shirt. She is just playing with some kids, and by the looks of it, it's tag. You are overreacting by a mile. We played way worse games than that growing up. He teased. I had no argument for him. He was right, but the idea of something happening to hurt incited a panic in me like nothing else ever had. And I'm not an idiot, Sawyer continued when he realized I wasn't going to say anything. I was keeping an eye on things. She told me she had never been outside alone, bro. As her doctor, it's good for her to try things outside her comfort zone. She had never been outside alone before? My heart clenched a little, but I watched her play with the kids for a while. She was running when she caught sight of me, and she immediately stopped. It's time to get ready for dinner, I told her, trying to keep my voice even, despite my nerves. She nodded at me, but the solemn expression she often wore returned to her face, and I hated it. We walked back to our room in silence, but as soon as the bedroom door closed behind us, she was immediately scribbling on her chalkboard. I'm sorry, I was not running away. I was playing, she wrote. It was one of the clearest sentences she had ever written, taking me by surprise. I hadn't talked to her much in the last couple of days, but it was clear she had been working. I'm not mad. I just worry about you, I told her gently, pushing a strand of hair out of her face that had fallen out of her ponytail. I couldn't stand it if you got hurt. I wanted to try outside, she wrote. I'm okay. I nodded at her and cupped her face. I couldn't control how protective I was becoming over her, or how much I really wanted to lean down and kiss her lips in this moment. My wolf wasn't helping. He wanted her as much as I did these days, but I knew we couldn't do that right now. I wouldn't risk her, even if it was increasingly hard to keep my hands to myself. My wolf, agreeing with me, suggested that we should just kill the one who marked her, so we could claim her for ourselves. And I couldn't help but think that wasn't a half-bad plan. The only problem was, who was he officially? I caught myself leaning in despite what my head was telling me. Her big eyes were looking at me, and for once she seemed to have desire in her eyes as well. Kiss her, my wolf pleaded. No, I shook my head and backed away. I couldn't do that to her. She was just beginning to heal. I couldn't mess that up again. You should change for dinner, I told her. My voice was husky with desire. She nodded and moved toward the closet, and I sat in the chair for a moment, trying to process what just happened. I had never craved intimacy like this before. No one had ever driven me or my wolf this crazy with desire. No one had ever made me think through consequences like this before either. I didn't want to hurt her. The idea of hurting her made my stomach churn. But the idea of touching her, kissing her, anything with her, made my heart flutter and my restraint wear thin. I had no idea how long I could go on like this, but there was no choice at the moment, and that unsettled me the most. "I'll meet you in the dining room," I called out to Grace. I didn't wait for any response or sign she'd give me. I just bolted. I needed to get out of this room and put some space between us before I did something dumb like give in to my desire. I needed calm, but the yelling down the hallway told me I was not going to get it. "You had no right!" I heard my beta, Leon yelled. "It's not my fault that your mate went looking for what you couldn't give," my twin Caleb shouted back. "You knew she was my mate," Leon retorted angrily. "Hey," I interjected with a sinking feeling. "What the hell is going on here?" "What's going on?" Leon seethed. "Is that this jackass slept with Heather, my mate." "What? Caleb, why would you do that?" Caleb frowned. "First off, it takes two to tango, so I don't know why we are just mad at me. Second, it was a long time ago. I was drunk, she was there, and we had a night. It wasn't anything special. We never did it again. I don't understand what the big deal is. It was a long time ago." He answered simply, glaring at Leon. "Being drunk is not an excuse," Leon shouted, "and it doesn't make it okay." "Caleb," I tried to keep my voice even, but I was fuming. How dare he act like it was no big deal? It was a big deal no matter how long ago it was. He had done this with several of the women I had thought might be the one for me. It had never mattered to him that they were mine. He had slept with them anyways. This has gotten out of control. You cannot sleep with every woman you see. There are people involved, people with feelings, people who you are supposed to care about. Caleb sneered. "Give me one good reason to care about the feelings of your best friend. What has he ever done for me?" But I did care. I cared enough to make sure his mate was well taken care of. The insinuation made Leon lunge, and I pulled him back, though a part of me wanted to let him go. Caleb might be my brother, my twin, but he was crossing too many lines for me to be comfortable with his behavior anymore. "I am serious," I growled at him. "This is your last warning, Caleb. There will be no others." "I was drunk," Caleb argued. "It was one time. I've done worse before." "That shouldn't matter," I shot back. "I don't get why you would even care. All those women were just using you anyways. They were so stupid. I'd be surprised if they even had brains in their heads. I was just a means to an end, since you couldn't give them what they wanted. I saved you from their stupidity, so you didn't have to keep them around that long." "It doesn't matter." I gritted out. He was really testing my patience, and the fact that he showed absolutely no remorse was grinding my gears. "You shouldn't touch what isn't yours." Caleb let out a laugh. He clearly didn't see a problem with any of this. "Some of those women came to me, Reese." "That's not an excuse, Caleb. And I wonder just how long it's going to take for sweet little Grace to come find her way to my bed when yours is left cold and empty." He continued taunting. I didn't think. I lunged at my brother, knocking us both to the ground. The second he brought up Grace, he went too far, and I realized he would never change. We both tumbled to the ground as we both started to half shift. Anything went in this moment. Anything but the kill shot. But I wasn't thinking when I punched him repeatedly, and he swung back, hitting my jaw and my shoulder. My hand connected with his jaw, and my hand held his throat as he tried to break free. He protected his face with one hand and began to scratch my other in an attempt to get me to let go. "Seriously, guys!" Leon shouted over the scuffle. "Knock it off before somebody sees." But we paid him no mind. This had been a long time coming, and for the first time since we were 12, we were going to do something about it. We hit, kicked, punched whatever we could, somehow finding us both on our feet again, but neither of us were off balance. He ran at me, but I defended myself well, only taking a punch to my shoulder as he attempted to then tackle me. I heard a gasp register in the background somewhere, and my stomach sank. I turned to see who had made the small noise, begging the goddess that it wasn't the person I thought it was. But when I turned, my whole body deflated. Damn it, it was Grace. I immediately released the hold I had on Caleb and straightened up. Leon, seeing what I saw, immediately jumped in to hold back a screeching, lunging Caleb, and I saw someone out of the corner of my eye move to help him. To my surprise, We had a sizable crowd watching the spectacle, but my eyes were only on one. I hated that I had lost control. I hated it more that I had lost control in front of her. I quickly straightened out my clothes and ran my hand through my hair. I needed to look as composed as possible for Grace. Grace, who was cowering in the doorframe, making herself as small as possible. Grace, whose sweet big eyes were closed in fear. Grace, who I could see shaking from head to toe because of something I did. I did this. Gracie, I whispered as I crouched down in front of her. She opened her eyes and looked at me with a fear in them I wished I could ease. It's okay. You're safe now. No one is going to hurt you. I promised. She gave me a questioning look as if to say, you turned on your own brother. You turned on your other brides. When will you turn on me? And that felt like a stab in the back that made me feel sick. I won't tolerate disrespect, I told her, and she whimpered, looking away from me. He will get what he deserves. You have nothing to fear. But even as I said those words, I felt like I was lying to her. She had no idea what respect actually meant. Her old pack seemed to have mistreated her, making her misunderstand the word, and my words of comfort weren't actually comforting at all. It was her own sister who had treated her poorly, and here I was from an outsider perspective doing the same to my brother. I wanted to slap myself for that one. I gently touched her face after a moment and forced her to look at me, trying to get her to see the sincerity in my eyes. You are safe, Gracie. It was just a scuffle. He did some horrible things he can't take back. I handled it poorly. I will handle it right now. Trust me? I pleaded. She hesitated a moment before nodding, and I breathed a sigh of relief. I stretched my arms out to help her up, and she took them looking gracious. She was clearly still frightened, but she seemed to have it under control, which was a start. Once we were both standing, I turned back to the sizable crowd that had gathered and regained my Alpha King composure. I was not the man to be messed with, and brother or not, there would be consequences. I turned toward my brother, Leon, and another pack member that I knew as Jason. Caleb was still fighting to get out of their grips, but he still when he saw me paying attention to him. Back for more, brother? He asked with a laugh etched in his face. I smiled at him coldly, and his face fell. Due to my brother, Caleb's repeated transgressions against your Alpha King and you Beta, as well as several other members of the pack, I have decided that a severe punishment is now necessary. There was a murmur among the crowd as more people seemed to be joining to see what was going on. I opened the pack link so everyone could be aware of what was happening. Caleb laughed out loud, clearly not believing I would do anything of any substance. I hereby declare, I continued loudly, that Caleb Sonnet will have the choice to be exiled or have a lifelong imprisonment. The choice of his punishment is up to him. The crowd let out a simultaneous gasp, and Caleb looked at me in shock. He had never expected I would go that far, but I was the Alpha King, and he had threatened what was mine. Riss, surely you can't mean that. Caleb tried. I am your brother, your twin. And I gave you warning after warning after warning, Caleb. You should have heard me. You should have listened. You made your choices. Not me. I tried to help you. You chose not to stop. You had no remorse for the damage you've done to your so-called family. I should have done this a long time ago, but I chose to believe you could change. But you won't. You made that very clear today, so no more chances. Please, Riss, he begged, the panic in his voice so real, I almost gave in. I am your brother, and this is harsh to anyone. I promise I will do better. You've had chances, I repeated. I have given you ample chances, more than I ever should have. So, make a choice, or I will make it for you. I snuck a peek at Grace. Her face was pale, and I knew she was uncomfortable with what was happening, but she didn't show it. She stood tall, her blonde hair pulled back into a tight ponytail, for once not falling into her face. I was so proud of her bravery that I almost forgot that we had a whole crowd around us as I stared at her. Keyword, almost. And when I remembered, I forced myself to look away from her and back at my brother. Riss, you can't be serious. What am I supposed to do? It is no longer my problem, I replied. If you can't make a choice, I will make it for you. You would use your alpha power on me? Your own brother? His eyes glowed with fury, and I could tell his wolf was fighting for control. Yes, I said calmly but coldly. So what is it going to be? Lifelong imprisonment or banishment? And we were met with silence as the question hung in the air between us. I could feel the intense gaze of everyone around us, but I didn't take my eyes off of my brother. Caleb looked calm, but I could see his inner turmoil to stay or go, but he had to make a choice. He was discrediting everything I had built, discrediting me, my beta, taking our honor, hurting the people he was supposed to love. It was too much. He wasn't supposed to do this to his family. He should have taken his warnings more seriously. May I have time to pack my belongings? Caleb said, finally meeting my eyes. Yes, I responded coolly. Then I choose banishment. Caleb answered just as coolly. I sighed and nodded. Beta Leon will supervise. You have an hour and a half. Caleb grimaced, but nodded, standing on his own 2 feet, free of the people who had been restraining him. I nodded for them to go and stood there for a moment, feeling a little lost. I was losing my brother, and despite what he had done, I felt heavy about my decision. He was my twin, after all. We might not have been close, but he was my other half. A small, gentle hand touched my arm, bringing me back to reality. I looked down to see Grace's steady hand of encouragement, knowing what it must have just taken her to touch me first. I gave her a small smile and turned back toward the crowd. You may all head on to dinner, I told them, pulling Grace's hand into my own. She looked hesitant, but pulled out her chalkboard and stabilized it against the wall before beginning to write. You okay? She asked. The temptation was too real. I kissed the back of her hand before reluctantly letting it go, so I wouldn't do something like that again. I will be, I told her. She nodded in understanding and didn't ask any more questions. I'm going to go talk to Sawyer. Are you all right going to dinner alone now? She nodded again and gave me a small smile. I wanted right then and there to wrap her up and bury my face in her neck, but I contained my desires and moved further away. I watched her walk to the steps and I headed back upstairs to my office to call Sawyer. Hello? He answered slightly breathlessly. Hey, did you hear the mind link? I asked, now regretting broadcasting it out to everyone. No, I'm just finishing up a surgery right now. You know that I block it during that. Sawyer answered with annoyance in his voice. Is there an emergency? Not quite an emergency, but definitely a situation. Don't talk to anyone until you talk to me. How long till you're done? My part will be done in about 10 minutes, he answered, but I could hear the slight anxiety now in his voice. Okay, I answered. Come straight to my office when you're done. We need to talk. Did I do something wrong? It was a hesitant question that made my heart hurt. As tough as he was, he struggled sometimes with being a doctor in my gamma, and he always worried that he wasn't enough of either. No, Sawyer, you did nothing wrong. I'll tell you everything when you get here, I said in my gentlest big brother voice. I sat with my head in my hands in silence until I heard my brother's familiar knock. Come in, I called out. Sawyer opened the door hesitantly and moved slowly till he was seated in the chair across from me at the desk. What's going on? He asked nervously. There is no easy way to say this, I started calmly. However, our brother has made some choices that I can no longer ignore. Did he do something to Grace? Sawyer interrupted in a panic. No, I mean nothing more than flirting. I was glad to see at least one of my brothers seem to care about her. No, he slept with Heather, Leon's wife. I could feel the intense gaze of everyone around us, but I didn't take my eyes off of my brother. Caleb looked calm, but I could see his inner turmoil to stay or go, but he had to make a choice. He was discrediting everything I had built, discrediting me, my beta, taking our honor, hurting the people he was supposed to love. It was too much. He wasn't supposed to do this to his family. He should have taken his warnings more seriously. May I have time to pack my belongings? Caleb said, finally meeting my eyes. Yes, I responded coolly. Then I choose banishment. Caleb answered just as coolly. I sighed and nodded. Beta Leon will supervise. You have an hour and a half. Caleb grimaced, but nodded, standing on his own 2 feet, free of the people who had been restraining him. I nodded for them to go and stood there for a moment, feeling a little lost. I was losing my brother, and despite what he had done, I felt heavy about my decision. He was my twin after all. We might not have been close, but he was my other half. A small, gentle hand touched my arm, bringing me back to reality. I looked down to see Grace's steady hand of encouragement, knowing what it must have just taken her to touch me first. I gave her a small smile and turned back toward the crowd. "You may all head on to dinner," I told them, pulling Grace's hand into my own. She looked hesitant, but pulled out her chalkboard and stabilized it against the wall before beginning to write. "You okay?" she asked. The temptation was too real. I kissed the back of her hand before reluctantly letting it go so I wouldn't do something like that again. "I will be," I told her. She nodded in understanding and didn't ask any more questions. "I'm going to go talk to Sawyer. Are you all right going to dinner alone now?" She nodded again and gave me a small smile. I wanted right then and there to wrap her up and bury my face in her neck, but I contained my desires and moved further away. I watched her walk to the steps, and I headed back upstairs to my office to call Sawyer. "Hello?" he answered slightly breathlessly. "Hey, did you hear the mind link?" I asked, now regretting broadcasting it out to everyone. "No, I'm just finishing up a surgery right now. You know that I block it during that." Sawyer answered with annoyance in his voice. "Is there an emergency?" "Not quite an emergency, but definitely a situation. Don't talk to anyone until you talk to me. How long till you're done?" "My part will be done in about 10 minutes, he answered, but I could hear the slight anxiety now in his voice. "Okay," I answered. "Come straight to my office when you're done. We need to talk." Did I do something wrong? It was a hesitant question that made my heart hurt. As tough as he was, he struggled sometimes with being a doctor in my gamma, and he always worried that he wasn't enough of either. "No, Sawyer, you did nothing wrong. I'll tell you everything when you get here," I said in my gentlest big brother voice. I sat with my head in my hands in silence until I heard my brother's familiar knock. "Come in," I called out. Sawyer opened the door hesitantly and moved slowly till he was seated in the chair across from me at the desk. "What's going on?" he asked nervously. "There is no easy way to say this," I started calmly. "However, our brother has made some choices that I can no longer ignore." "Did he do something to Grace?" Sawyer interrupted in a panic. "No, I mean nothing more than flirting." I was glad to see at least one of my brothers seem to care about her. "No, he slept with Heather, Leon's wife." The Alpha King had mentioned that I should go to dinner, but after the whole showdown with his brother on the 3rd floor, I found myself not hungry in the slightest. I had walked in on them fighting, and the fear I had felt in that moment had been too much. I was used to physical violence being used on me, but to see it and not be a part of it was just as scary. I had found myself so terrified that the Alpha King would turn on me, but also that he would get hurt. I was so lost in my head. I paid no attention to where I was going. My newfound freedom seemed to be getting the best of me, and I had found myself near the medical bay that was on the 1st floor even though I had never been to this one before. I immediately noticed Dr. Sawyer organizing supplies. Whatever he was doing seemed to be repetitive, and probably a little soothing, but the sadness on his face was undeniable, and it looked like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. I slowly approached him from the side, so I wouldn't startle him, but it didn't seem to quite work the way I had hoped it would. "Hey, Grace, I didn't see you come in," he said tiredly. I gave him a small smile and wrote on my chalkboard. "You okay?" "No, really," he answered sadly. I nodded in understanding. I gestured to the outside, hoping he would get what I meant. "Why didn't I go say goodbye?" he asked, clarifying what I was asking. I nodded, yes. "My brother Caleb has made choices for a long time that I haven't agreed with. He was his own downfall. It didn't matter how many chances he got, no matter how many times we tried to save him from himself, he was always going to self-destruct. It just makes me sad. I was closer with him than he was with Sawyer, but my wolf and I mind-linked him our goodbyes. I just didn't want to see him. It would make me sadder." I frowned. I understood why it would make him sadder, but it was weird to think about both Dr. Sonnet and his wolf both occupying his brain and body. I had never had a wolf to connect with, and I wondered how it worked. I also had never heard the word mind-linked. I know Sawyer had mentioned it before, and so had the Alpha King, but what they meant, I had no idea what they meant. "Wolf talks?" I finally asked with my chalkboard. Sawyer looked at me in surprise. "Yay, my wolf talks all the time. He rarely shuts up in my head. Sawyer answered, but there was confusion in his voice. To you? I wrote out again. Yes, but not only me, he can also mind-link others. Sawyer answered, stopping what he was doing to now give me his full attention. Oh, I didn't know how to ask any more questions. I couldn't spell anything I wanted to say. It didn't feel worthy of being speech-worthy, and I didn't know how to gesture it to make any sense. I know you don't have a connection to a wolf. Sawyer seemed to be picking his word choice cautiously. But didn't your old pack ever talk about their own wolves around you? I shook my head. No. I wrote on my board before adding, but no talk. What? Sawyer frowned and reread my board several times before he seemed to get what I was saying. I mean, yeah, even if they didn't really talk to you, I would have expected you to know how wolves communicate, both with their humans and through MindLink. It's like a vital part of werewolf culture. I have never even been to a pack where they didn't MindLink or where wolves talking to their human wasn't like common knowledge. They hated me, I responded on my chalkboard uneasily. Still, when you were working there was never like talk about the things people's wolves were saying, or their wolves complaining about not wanting to work? I frowned and thought about it for a minute before shaking my head. No. I had never heard anybody talk about their wolves the way Sawyer was. Was that wrong? When they needed someone in the pack house, did they send you or did they use silent communication? Because silent communication is sort of what mind linking is. We don't have to speak, but we still can talk to each other through our wolf's ability. The way he described the mind link made sense, but I didn't think my old pack had used it. I thought back to the day the monster thing had terrorized the pack, and how just before it Alpha King Reese's eyes had sort of glazed over, sort of becoming unfocused. My old pack had never done anything like that. I couldn't even remember ever seeing anyone so much as shift. I had never really thought about it before, but now it had me questioning everything. Me, I wrote, sent me, or other serve. I had no idea how to spell servant. But you don't talk, Sawyer questioned. How did you tell them? Got trouble, I wrote. Sawyer nodded in understanding. Well, sending other servants I guess makes sense if they didn't mind link, he said tiredly. You should go tell Reese everything you just told me, though. It might help with our investigation. I trouble? I wrote out, not sure if I was even spelling trouble correctly. No, Grace, Sawyer said gently. This is just a very odd thing that doesn't make any sense. Reese just needs to know. Would you like me to come with you? I hesitated for a moment and then nodded. My nerves were on fire, and I could feel the butterflies in my tummy. The Alpha King had just banished his own brother. It would take way less for him to banish me. So despite Sawyer's words, I was scared to death to tell the Alpha King what we had just learned. And maybe, just maybe, Sawyer would be able to help me explain what we had just uncovered about my old pack. I walked with Sawyer in silence back to the main area of the house and up the million stairs toward the Alpha King's office. My mind was racing. How was I going to explain what Sawyer and I had been talking about? I was only able to talk with him because he asked questions and could follow my line of thinking. How was I to explain what we just talked about from the beginning without the leading questions? How was I to know what was important? I had spent most of my life alone. I had never had a friend before. I had never been someone they even held simple conversations near, as if I would poison their thoughts or something. I had no idea what mattered or even what was different from this pack, because I had barely even been in this pack. My anxiety was borderline out of control, and I tried to take a steadying breath. I didn't even have a wolf. How was I supposed to know how any of this worked? My steps faltered as I felt a faint and subtle reaction within me when I had thought about not having a wolf. What the hell was that? I didn't even have words for how that felt or how unsettling it was. It wasn't my reaction. How could it not be my reaction? I was losing it. We reached the Alpha King's door, and I reached out and knocked gently before I could back out. Enter, the Alpha King called out. Sawyer opened the door and ushered me through it and further into the office till I was standing at the Alpha King's desk. What brings you two here? The Alpha King's gaze was tired and cold, which in turn made me even more nervous. Come to tell me you want Grace for yourself, Sawyer, that you plan to sleep with her too? I felt my cheeks flush, and I watched Sawyer's face morph into rage. That was uncalled for, and you know it. Apologize, because we aren't the ones you are mad at. The Alpha King looked surprised for a moment before his face softened to grief. You're right, I'm sorry. Now why are you here? I looked to Sawyer, not knowing where to begin. I had no idea what I was supposed to say. My pack, I wrote slowly on my chalkboard when Sawyer was no help. Did not. I froze and realized I had no idea how to spell mindlink. It hadn't been in any of the books Alana and I had gone over. This time, I fully turned to Sawyer and signed the word help, then wrote an M on the board so he could see what I was talking about. Oh, he said in surprise when he realized what I was talking about. Mindlink. Mindlink. What's this about mindlinking? Alpha King Reese demanded angrily as I scribbled the letters that Sawyer had just told me. Fear surged through me as I flashed him the board. He was going to banish me, just like he did his brother. Or worse. Maybe he'd torture me so I'd remember my place. My old place was really where I seemed to belong. Your old pack doesn't mindlink? He asked, his voice cold and not inquisitive at all, and all hope I had that he would understand faded. I shook my head, fearing his wrath that I had seen in full force earlier this afternoon. What kind of sick game are you playing, Grace? He shouted, making me cower back slightly behind Sawyer as the Alpha King grabbed my chalkboard out of my hands. What is it that you are hiding? You're just like the fucking rest of them. I looked around trying to figure out how to convey what I needed to. I saw a water bottle on his desk, and before I could back out, I quickly cleared all important-looking documents off his desk as another "what the hell" escaped his lips. I quickly started trying to draw with the water. I drew the Alpha King and a wolf equals 1, and then I drew the Alpha King and a wolf equals 2, before stepping back and looking at him expectantly. I knew it wasn't super clear, but I was hoping it was enough to at least start him asking questions. What does this mean? The Alpha King grumbled. Sawyer moved to see it better, and it took him a minute before he said, okay, I get it. She's saying she thought that the wolf part of us was just our consciousness in different forms. She didn't know until we were talking that the wolf part of us is independent in a sense. She didn't realize we talked to our wolves or that they had their own thoughts that are separate from ours. Right, Grace? I nodded, confirming exactly that. Alpha King Reese looked up at him in surprise and frustration. How did you get that? Sawyer shrugged. She drew the same image with a 1 and a 2, and she was surprised downstairs when I said our wolves talked to us. It made sense. I nodded and began to gesture again. I pointed to myself, then gestured all around me, signed no before pointing to my eye and finger spelled wolf. Your pack didn't show their wolf side? Sawyer asked. I shook my head no. The Alpha King ran his hand through his hair exhaustedly, and surprise was etched on his face. Reese, you okay? Sawyer asked when he didn't say anything. This is bizarre, Alpha King Reese said after a long moment. It doesn't make any sense. There has to be something we are missing. I asked Grace to tell you because I thought it might help the investigation. Sawyer said hesitantly, and I realized then that he was closer to my age than Alpha King Reese was. Well, it leads me to far more questions, that's for sure. It's got to be a part of a larger conspiracy. Thank you for sharing, Grace. I'm sorry I snatched this in anger. That was not right of me. You were just trying to help. He handed me back my chalkboard. Tomorrow we will return to the Red Blood Pack to uncover the truth. A surprise raid seems necessary. We will leave first thing in the morning to hopefully arrive by nightfall. Sawyer nodded, but I felt fear. If this backfired, it would backfire specifically on me, and I had no idea what to expect. But there was something in the Alpha King's voice when he said, "Tonight we plan. Tomorrow we get the answers we've been waiting for." And I realized if he asked, I would probably follow him anywhere. I stood at the window of our room and stared out into the packland. I could see Alpha King Reese helping load cars and organize warriors for the raid. He had been at it for hours, and the sun was just starting to come up. I knew he was gathering the best warriors we had and preparing for a potential conflict, but I wasn't sure we were ready for it. I mean, I knew I certainly wasn't, but that didn't mean I could sit this one out. The Alpha King, Beta Leon, Gamma Sawyer, Delta Damien, and myself had sat in the Alpha King's office for several hours after the Alpha King had declared that they would be raiding the Red Blood Pack. Sawyer had helped me loop everyone in on what we had discovered while talking, and I could still hear Delta Damien's voice saying that none of this was making sense. That was the point, though. None of it was making sense, hence why we were now invading. The plans were all drawn up. Who would be going, and where they would be stationed. Damien would stay behind, watching for any attack that they may counter with, and ready to call for reinforcements if needed. Beta Leon would stay just beyond the Red Blood Pack's border, so as not to lead them on to this being a direct attack. He could also be on the lookout for strange things. He could intervene if we needed him, or he could go home and help if they were under attack. He was our middleman. And that left me, Sawyer, and the Alpha King to enter their pack. And yes, I was included in these plans. The Alpha King hadn't given me a choice, which had left me stunned and insanely anxious. The Alpha King promised that I wouldn't have to face anyone alone, though, and I had begged him not to leave me there, no matter what they found. He then touched my face and looked me in the eye and promised that no matter what happened, he would not be leaving me behind, and we were going to do this together. Now, everybody had their assignments, and I stared out the window feeling uneasy. I would be okay with never going back, but that wasn't a choice. The Alpha King had told the maids to dress me like a true princess, and I felt severely out of place, even though I was in a palace. The dress was the finest piece of clothing I had ever even dreamed of seeing. It was a deep V pale blue lace dress that hugged my waist and puffed out. I hated that it showed my scars, but part of was proud of myself was being brave enough to show them off to the people who gave them to me. "Come on, Grace." The Alpha King's voice pulled me out of my thoughts. His hand was held out to me, and I wondered how long he had been waiting on me. "Sorry," I signed. "No need to apologize," he soothed as he guided me out of the room. He also looked handsome. His dark hair was combed off to the side, and he had recently shaved. He was wearing the same coat he had worn the first time he had come to my pack. "How are you doing, Gracie?" he asked once we were in the car, and it was just us again. I shrugged. I didn't even know how to begin to explain how I felt. I felt like a mess. I felt like I could just explode with anxiety and grief and everything in between. Did that make me okay? Would I ever be okay? "Remember, love," he said gently, and my heart fluttered at the new nickname. "I am not sending you back to these people. I will not be leaving you behind. This mission to provoke your old pack and make them give us answers. I am not giving you back to them or giving you to anyone ever again. You are mine, okay? You are my bride, my future, my chosen mate, my maybe fated mate. We go together and we leave together. Are we clear?" I nodded, my heart racing at his words. That was probably the most romantic thing I had ever heard in my life, and it was directed at me. I wondered if he had had me dressed like a doll to make a statement. If this was his way of telling my old pack, "Fuck you, I made it." I touched my hair subconsciously. Alana had put it into a fancy braid bun, but was it enough to claim practically princess? "You look beautiful," the Alpha King said, pulling my hand away from my hair. I blushed at his words. Was this what it really felt like to be treated like a human? To have someone even sort of like you? We fell into a fairly comfortable silence for the rest of the drive. The Alpha King closed his eyes for a while, but I knew he wasn't sleeping. I'm sure he was trying to envision whatever we were going to run into and how to plan for it. I, on the other hand, stared out the window. The last time the Alpha King had tried to get answers from my pack, no one had been there. Would they try to do the same thing again? Would we find anything at all? Soon, the buildings began to take shape, and I recognized the houses as a smaller version of the convoy passed through. Everything looked the same but felt different. I saw familiar faces. Several people stopped to stare at the convoy, and I had to fight the feelings that threatened to come out. They had bullied me. They had done nothing to protect me. I had just been a child when everything had started, and nobody had stepped up to help me until a stranger showed up on a random Tuesday. The pain I felt with that threatened to consume me, but to my surprise, so did the desire for revenge. I wondered which feeling would win as my sister and the pack house came into view, and a part of me hoped it was revenge. The Alpha King gave me his hand as we stepped out of the car, and Kinsley was right there to greet us. I wondered if she had been mind-linked, or if she had been informed of our arrival another way. Kinsley looked very much the same as I had left her. She was dressed to the nines. Her dress was just below knee length, and it hugged her figure in all the right places. Her hair was in an updo, held in with a claw clip. She looked so stunning that I almost forgot I was dressed beautifully too. I was not the girl who had left here, and being this close to Kinsley sent a weird sensation through me that I didn't know what to do with. My dear Alpha King and Grace, Kinsley should have bowed, but she remained righted much to Alpha King Rye's dismay. To what do we owe this unexpected visit? I am so excited to see you both. Grace, you have been missed. The Alpha King's hand tightened around mine, and I had to remind myself that I would not shrink around the people who made my life a living hell for all those years. She meant that they missed abusing me, and I would not be granting that any of my conscious thought. According to our alliance agreement, I am within my rights to visit the pack periodically to see project updates and see that things are running to my standards. Kinsley wasn't looking at us as she walked beside me, leading the way to the pack house, but I saw her swallow and noticed her unease. I was surprised at how the same everything looked, and yet it was all so different. This was no longer home. Of course, Your Majesty, Kinsley backtracked. I just wish we could have had more time to prepare. We would have loved to supply you with a feast and had rooms drawn up for you and your men. And Grace, the Alpha King added coolly. Yes, of course Grace is included in that, Kinsley stammered. She wasn't used to being kind to me, and she had thought I would be useless to the Alpha King. She never expected that I would eventually be his bride. At least that's what he kept telling me. To my surprise, Alpha Adrian didn't come running to greet us, and I wondered where he could be. He would have never missed an opportunity to suck up to the Alpha King. Where is Alpha Adrian? Alpha King Rhys asked coldly, seemingly noting the same thing I had. I had unresolved issues and things to discuss with him, hence the visit. I noticed Kinsley's eye twitched, and I knew that meant that she was trying to stay calm about something, even though she wasn't. Come on, she forced a smile. We can wait in the lounge for my husband and the beta. They are out right now, but they should be home soon. I'm sure after such a long travel day, you must be exhausted and a little hungry. Being in the pack house was even weirder than just being back in the pack. I had hardly spent any time on pack grounds, but I had spent nearly every moment of my entire life in this house. The memories of all the torment I had to endure came flashing back with every step. Kinsley once hit me with that umbrella by the door simply because it was raining, and I couldn't make it stop. I had my head bashed into that sink in the bathroom for having the nerve to pee during working hours. I had more burns and little knife marks covering my hands from every second I had to work in that kitchen. Kinsley and Adrian had thrown me down these steps more times than I could even count. Please, sit. She wasn't even directly addressing me, but the words still seemed difficult for her to even say. The Alpha King led us to the couch he had been sitting on the first time we met. He gestured for me to sit first, and then took his place next to me. Kinsley grabbed a bell from the side table near the door and rang it loudly. A servant immediately appeared, and Kinsley ordered them to return with snacks and tea, stating again how hungry we must be after our long travels. The servant didn't so much as spare us a glance before bolting from the room to get what Kinsley had asked for. So, Luna Kinsley, where is your husband? Alpha King Rhys asked once the servants had brought in the tea and snacks. Oh, he'll be back soon, Kinsley tried to play it off. He's out on business right now. You know how it is. I can hardly keep up with my own schedule, let alone his. I tried not to laugh because we both knew that Kinsley had no schedule to keep. She pawned everything off on others. I hope he'll be back soon. We have important business to discuss. Alpha King Rhys stated coolly. Please, while you wait, just enjoy the refreshments to ease your fatigue. I know how hard it is to travel so far. I snuck a glance at the Alpha King. He appeared to be irritated, But he lifted the offered cup, and my unease only intensified as I stared at the cup. What the heck? I couldn't help the feeling. It was overwhelming. I almost couldn't breathe as I just stared at his cup. What was the deal with this cup? He started to raise it to his lips, and before I even knew what I was doing, I knocked it out of his hand, startling everyone, including myself, but especially Kinsley. The Alpha King's eyes met mine in surprise, and I looked at him with pleading eyes, begging him to understand. I had no idea how to explain the feeling I had about the drink. I just knew he couldn't drink it. He seemed to get what I was telling him, because the next thing I knew, he stood up and grabbed Kinsley by the neck, lifting her off the ground. A small gasp escaped my lips, and I tried to keep my emotions in check as fear threatened to take control. "What did you do?" he demanded. I grabbed Luna Kinsley by the throat and slammed her into the wall. I watched fear cloud her eyes as she squirmed beneath me, but I didn't loosen my grip. There would be hell to pay for messing with me and what's mine. "What did you do?" I demanded, showing my teeth and letting my aura slip a little. "Nothing," Kinsley exclaimed. "Do not lie to me," I growled, tightening my grip. Real tears fell freely from Kinsley's eyes, unlike her usual fake tears, but she stood by her story. "I didn't do anything. Please believe me. It's her. She's framing me." "So does that mean that you were trying to poison Grace, or me?" I asked, but the idea of her trying to harm Grace right in front of me just made me angrier. "Please let me go. My husband won't appreciate your hands on me." "Your husband is lucky I didn't kill you for trying to poison me," I roared. "Tell me why you tried to poison us. Does it have anything to do with the mark on her neck?" "What?" Kinsley's face visibly paled, but the confusion on her face looked real. Who from this awful pack had the nerve to forcibly mark this girl? The longer this went on, the angrier I was getting. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Grace reach out to a shaky hand toward me, just as the door to the room swung open, revealing a very angry Adrian. Grace's hand recoiled immediately. "Get your hands off her," he shouted, shoving me back. His shove was weak and had no impact on me, but I moved away slightly so I could shield Grace more. Well, look who finally showed up," I jeered, clapping my hands slowly. "Just because I'm not here means that you have the right to touch my mate," Adrian seethed. "Your mate tried to poison us." I watched Adrian take a small breath in an attempt to calm himself, but there was still anger burning in his eyes, and something else that looked something like lust every time he looked at Grace, making me want to hide her anywhere but here, so he would never be able to see her again. I wanted her to be anywhere but here. "Please, let's just all calm down here. This is all just a big misunderstanding," Adrian tried. "How is poisoning me and my mate a misunderstanding?" I asked through gritted teeth. I could see a blush rise to Grace's face at the word mate. It was clear she still wasn't used to such words. "Your mate?" Adrian stuttered. "Yes, and that leads me to my next question. Since you are her old pack alpha, who the hell marked her without her consent? Because she sure as hell wasn't living a good mated life when I took her with me on my last visit." I watched the worry on Adrian's face grow as he just as quickly tried to mask it. He seemed to realize much quicker than I expected that he was in a losing battle, but I was curious what their next move would be, since they always seemed to be a step ahead. "Listen, Alpha King Reese, my mate meant you no harm. She saw her sister, who, as you know, has had a very troubled past, as I am sure you have noticed in your home as well, and she panicked. It was all in self-defense. First of all, Grace has a name. Second, she has caused no trouble in my home, which is leading me to question your leadership skills and your failure to protect those under you. Third, Grace hasn't done a damn thing since was got here. She hasn't spoken. She has hardly moved. She has sat here calmly and politely and protected me from your poison, so I'd like to know more about her time here and why the hell she was marked without her consent." "It was my beta, Your Majesty. Grace had led him on and he lost control of himself. Do you let everyone in this godforsaken place just do as they please?" I growled. "Bring him to me. There will be hell to pay for touching what is mine." "Of course, yes, Kinsley. Go retrieve Beta Quinton." Kinsley nodded, but it wasn't hard to miss the fear on her face as she slipped out of the room and made eye contact with me. "Grace?" She looked up at me with her wide blue eyes of hers that showed her fear so openly. You are being so brave. I will make them pay for what they have done to you, my love. You are so much more than they say. She looked hesitant, but she nodded, nonetheless. Now, should we talk about our alliance now? Alpha King Reese, Adrian asked, trying to pull the attention off of Grace, almost as if he was afraid she would say something. Alpha Adrian, I think you must be delusional if you think our alliance is still intact after a poisoning attempt and the mistreatment of my mate. Sir, please, let's leave the past in the past. We have so much to offer you. Alpha Adrian continued to plead his case. I'm aware of what you have to offer. I forced my voice to remain calm, even though all I wanted was to rip them all apart. Alpha Adrian misunderstood what I meant by my statement, and immediately began to go into great detail about the things he thought would benefit my rule. But there was something off, something he wasn't saying. Grace touched my arm gently. She seemed to notice the shift in my mood, and her face looked worried. I took her hand in mine, reassuring her that I wasn't actually going back on my promises to her. I was just letting Adrian talk, hoping he would talk enough to give us a clue to what exactly we were missing when it came to them. And when he finally did, there would be hell to pay. And I couldn't wait for the opportunity to have revenge, because I would be getting my revenge. I felt like the room was spinning. Beta Quinton marked me. I hardly ever interacted with the man. Adrian always made sure I never really interacted with any males in the pack. Beta Quinton was one of the usual tormentors, and he would help with punishments and things of that nature, but to be given the chance to mark me, something about that felt off. But then again, I really didn't remember that night well. It was all a blur. It could have very well been him, but I wasn't sure I'd be able to say for sure. The door to the room opened slowly. Kinsley walked in with the beta just behind her. Her mascara was no longer smudged and running down her face, so I knew she had taken a moment to clean herself up and get her composure, but there was little she could do about the handprints from the Alpha King on her neck. Alpha Adrian, Alpha King Reese, I was told you wanted to see me? The beta asked, but there was obvious confusion on his face. I might not have been involved with much that revolved around the pack, but I did know that Beta Quinton was almost never involved in things of this nature. The gig is up, Adrian said coldly. The Alpha King is most displeased with your decision to mark the girl, but if you beg for his forgiveness and accept your punishment, I'm sure he will go easy on you. Marked her? The beta's voice shook. I didn't. Enough lies. Alpha King Reese snarled. I want my mate. She is mine, and I do not share. He paused for a moment, and I knew it was his way of trying to contain his rage, and he was barely hanging on. You will accept Grace's rejection. Are we understood? Beta Quinton nods, but the fear in his eyes was so palpable I started to feel my own nerves set in. Beta Quinton was not a good man, I knew that, but was he really the one who forced his mark on me? I mean, he could barely look at me in the past. Was that because he regretted marking me, or was there more to it that I just didn't understand? He didn't have the same lustful look in his eyes as so many of the other men in the pack. Grace, prepare yourself to reject him, the Alpha King prompted coldly. I nodded, but my palms were clammy, and my heart started to race. Oh God, I would have to say the words out loud. I hadn't even thought of that till now. I hadn't said a word aloud since I was a child. It only ever got me in trouble, and what if this only got me in more trouble? Oh God, oh God, oh God. Grace, come on, do what we discussed, reject him, the Alpha King demanded. I knew he was trying to keep his calm for my sake, but he was reading my hesitation like a book. I was not the girl he wanted me to be. No matter how much he said it, I was sure I wasn't his mate. His mate had to be strong and beautiful. And I couldn't even speak, even when my life seemingly depended on it. If I wanted to stay with the Alpha King, I had to do this. And I couldn't. I couldn't make myself form the words. How typical of Grace, Adrian sneered. Can't ever just follow simple directions. I felt my face flush and tears began to flood my eyes. I was useless. I had always been nothing but useless. Shut up, Alpha Adrian, the Alpha King growled. Don't talk about things that you can't even begin to understand. I'm just saying, this is just a taste of how she was in our household, always so disobedient. It's a wonder that anyone would want to mark her at all. Yes, one time I asked her to use the blue dishes at a party and she couldn't even do that, Kinsley added in. She put out a mix of colors, using the cream dishes and the blue. Oh goodness, it was so distasteful. The Alpha King rolled his eyes and looked at me expectantly. I made eye contact with Beta Quinton, who was trying so hard not to show his panic, but his eyes were wide with fear and his whole body was shaking. Paul, please, Grace, just get it over with. Reject me, the Beta pleaded. But as I stared at him, I couldn't help but think he was an innocent man. At least in this specific regard. The way Adrian had known it was him just really didn't make sense to me. I suppose the Beta could have confessed it to him, but the Beta didn't seem to be the kind of man to do that. So there was something here that we were missing. Grace? The Alpha King's impatient voice drew my attention back to him. I looked at him this time, begging that he'd understand what I was trying to convey. The only thing he seemed to get, though, was that I couldn't go through with it. I couldn't convince myself that I should speak. I didn't know what would happen if I did, but I knew that I couldn't. See? Adrian spoke up again. She wanted to bear his mark. Such silly talk about how she was forced into it now seems so silly. Clearly, she still wants him, and she'd be moved back to the pack immediately. Beta Quinton stood up and bolted for the door. He knew that he was being set up, and he knew the price he would end up paying. He was one of the smarter ones in the pack, but the panic in his movements was obvious and uncoordinated. "I won't die for her," he exclaimed in terror. Even in his panic, he was fast, but Alpha King Reese was faster. He shifted his right hand into his wolf's paw, which I didn't know he could do. His claws were long and sharp as slashed Beta Quinton's throat from behind, catching up to him in only 2 steps, killing him instantly. Chaos erupted around us. Kinsley and the servants around screamed, but the Beta hadn't even had the chance to scream. I gasped as blood poured from his very open throat as he dropped to the floor, a pool of blood now surrounding him. I looked at the Alpha King, worried that maybe I was next since I couldn't utter the words of rejection. Would he hate me now? Was I next? "Why did you do that?" Kinsley shrieked. "He was our Beta!" I wanted the bond severed. I had to be sure. The Alpha King shrugged, but he wasn't even trying to hide the smirk on his face. I looked to Adrian, whose mouth was set in a small frown, but his eyes were wide. He didn't say a word, which honestly surprised me. "You have no idea who you are messing with," Kinsley screeched, snapping Adrian out of his shock. "There are things going on that even you, Alpha King Reese, are unaware of. We could have helped you." Adrian grabbed her and started to drag her out of the room, but she kept yelling, "You will regret this." I tuned her out as I watched the Alpha King's eyes glaze over. I knew now that meant he was mind-linking someone, and if I had any guesses, it was probably to tell Beta Leon to follow them. He then turned his attention to me, and I felt my nerves flutter. He wasn't looking at me with hate, but I could see the confusion on his face. "You aren't in pain?" he asked, gently touching my face. I shook my head slowly. I didn't feel any different at all. "Did you want to be marked?" he asked calmly, but there was tension in his voice, like he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. I shook my head quicker this time and wished that I had my chalkboard. I wasn't sure how to convey to him that I wasn't sure it was the Beta who had marked me. I thought for a moment, which was kinda hard to do under the Alpha's King's scrutiny, but then I had an idea. I pointed to the crumpled body on the floor. "The Beta?" he clarified. I nodded and then pointed to the mark on my neck and then made an X with my arms, hoping that he would understand what I was talking about. "You don't," he started, but was cut off as the door swung open with a bang, causing me to flinch. "That was dramatic, Leon." Alpha King Reese teased with a slight smirk. I was so confused at how he could be so light in a moment like this. "My apologies, my king," Leon said breathlessly, "but they're gone." All sense of teasing disappeared, and the Alpha King face twisted into fury. "What did you just say?" he asked, forcing a calm I know he didn't feel. "Alpha Adrian, Luna Kinsley, and their entire pack have disappeared. We've looked everywhere. It's just like before. They must have a secret hiding place, but I checked all the usual placements for one, and I have found no trace of them or a hiding spot." The Alpha King slammed his hand onto the coffee table, channeling all of his rage into that hit, effectively causing the coffee table to snap in half, and the Alpha King to appear slightly calmer. "We have been deceived. Do you see Grace's neck?" The Alpha King growled. "She's still marked? I thought you killed the guy who marked her?" Leon frowned, looking over to the dead body that still laid between us in the doorway. Clearly, he died because his alpha framed him. The Alpha King sneered. "He probably would have died in the end anyway, but it's a pity that we didn't get more answers from him. This pack is full of lies and deceit, and I want to know all of it. Leon, I want us to go over our contracts with them again to see if what they were asking for from us has any further relevance. I want a search party left here, and nobody from it leaves till they are found. We will not let a random pack cause this much disruption without severe consequences." "Yes, sir. Tell Gwen that she is in charge here and that we are leaving," he said shortly, before sneaking a glance at me and softening a bit. "We've tortured Grace enough here today." I looked at him in surprise and felt incredibly vulnerable. Did he really care about how I was feeling? Could he really tell that I was beginning to feel the anxiety eating me alive? That flashes of my life here kept flashing before my eyes. Did he really see me? He reached his hand out to me, and I took it without a second thought. He wasn't mad at me for not being able to speak in front of everyone. He didn't hate me. At least I didn't think so. We made the walk to the car in silence, both of us looking around as if they would attack us for the stunt Alpha King Reese had pulled earlier, but it was eerily silent. There was nothing except the sound of the wind, which sounded like it was howling in the silence. The Alpha King opened the door for me, and I climbed in tiredly, suddenly exhausted from the day. The Alpha King climbed in on the other side and pulled me into him. I immediately felt comforted and laid my head on his lap, laying across the back seats. "Grace, are you all right?" he asked with worry in his voice. I shrugged. I could barely hear him. All I could see was my past. That night in the dungeon, the mysterious attacker who had had no fear in marking me, who had been furious I wouldn't go further with him, how I barely escaped with my life, how bad my body had hurt in that time. "You can talk to me, Grace," he tried, and there was a bit of a plea in his voice. "I'll listen. I know today had to have been hard for you, but you did so good." I nodded absently as the scene from that night replayed over and over in my head. The way he grabbed me, the way it was all blurry. As much as I wanted to tell the Alpha King where my head was, I couldn't. There was nothing to say. The anxiety had melted away. All I felt was nothing. I absently stroked her hair, wishing that I could understand an ounce of what was going on inside her incredibly seductive head. She had stared at the seat in front of us for a long time before she finally began silently crying. For the first time ever, I felt helpless. I couldn't make her feel better. I knew today was going to be a lot. I didn't realize how hard it was going to be on her. I could practically see the memories flashing before her, and I couldn't seem to pull her out of them. She eventually cried herself to sleep, and I watched her twitch now, dreaming of the things she was afraid of. All I could do was pull her close. All I wanted was to make it better. But she still bore another man's mark, and until that was gone, this was all I could give. The car came to a gentle stop, but she didn't so much as stir. I carefully lifted her into my arms and carried her out of the car and straight up to her room. It wasn't terribly late since we had left so early this morning, but the emotions of the day seemed to have drained everything she had in her. I hoped she would sleep better now that she was in a familiar space, but I wasn't sure if that mattered or not. God, I had never cared about a girl like this, literally ever. It was driving me mad. I wrapped her tightly in the blankets and sat in the chair next to the bed. I could watch her all day. If the beta wasn't her mate, her pack could just literally disappear, and nothing was making any sense. How the hell was I ever going to figure out the truth? "Riss?" Leon mind-linked with urgency. "Yes? Can you come outside, please?" There was a pause. "And don't bring Grace." I gave Grace a longing look and headed out the door once again. "Hey, I didn't realize you were back," Sawyer called out as I passed him. "Hey," I answered briefly before circling back to him. "I have to go deal with something. Can you just keep an eye on Grace in case she needs something? Today has been a lot." Sawyer nodded, and I took off down the stairs as Leon's sense of urgency lingered just on the brink of my mind. I stepped outside, and I could see all of my men near a car, and Leon was in the center of everyone. "Leon?" I questioned. He didn't answer me, but he reached into the car and pulled out a man in chains. The man looked normal by all accounts, other than he was naked, bound and covered in blood and mud. He looked fairly young, but looks could be deceiving. He was not one of my men, though, so I looked to my beta for clarification. "Explain, Leon. Look at him closer," Leon stated, his voice all business, telling me this wasn't some kind of joke. I frowned and did as he said, and the young man immediately began to transform. Fur began to grow, and he began to grow in size. My men immediately tightened the chains around him, trying to keep control of whatever was happening in front of me. The young man didn't fully turn wolf. Instead, he stood on 2 feet and was far larger than I had originally given the kid credit for. He fought my men with everything he had, trying to break free of the hold they had on him. "What the hell is this?" I demanded. Gwen found him. Her group was tracking Luna Kinsley and Alpha Adrian, as well as trying to find any trace of the pack, like you asked. The creature has no scent and is adept at hiding, especially since, as you can see, he's standing on 2 legs. "What is he?" I asked, feeling disgusted looking at this unknown creature. "I'm not sure, sir," Leon stated uneasily. "And if he is so good at hiding, how the hell did Gwen find him?" I asked, thinking out loud. "We think he fell out of a tree, otherwise we wouldn't have found or even noticed him. We still have people in the pack, looking to see, but we don't have the same ability as they do to climb." "Was he in this form when you found him?" I asked, looking at the others who were barely able to contain him. "Yes, he's shifted between his 2 forms several times. He seems to not know which one to stay in right now, and I'm not sure if having more forms is a potential, but we should prepare for anything." I stared at the creature for a long moment. Could he climb? Could they all be like this? Is that why we haven't found them yet? Could he have more than 1 form? Why hadn't I ever heard so much as a rumor about this creature in front of us? I looked up at the window that I knew was Grace's as the creature let out a roar unlike anything I had ever heard before. I hoped it wouldn't wake her, but then I got a flash of a similar day. The déjà vu was unreal. I had been spending time with Grace similar to today. Leon had mind-linked me, very similarly to today. And then I had come out, and my men at the time had been in a full-on battle with the creature. It had taken like 8 of my men, if I was remembering correctly, and one had gotten pretty injured before I fully stepped in. The creature had been similar, but I hadn't really gotten the best of looks at it. Could the thing in front of me be the same sort of creature? I mean, they both stood on 2 legs and looked wolfish, but not fully wolf, and definitely bigger than my wolf. And my wolf was large. They couldn't be the same, could they? I pulled Leon to the side, and he gave me a knowing look that he was thinking the same thing, but neither of us wanted to say anything in front of everyone. There was no reason to incite panic, at least not yet. "This could be the true form of the red blood pack," Leon said over the mind link. Werewolf hearing was impeccable, so even though we moved away, we didn't want a chance speaking out loud. "It could, which could also mean that Grace is this beast," I answered. "Don't go there," Leon warned. "Don't get caught up in that thought. Just because you see this as a monster doesn't mean it is one. Humans would consider us monsters and we aren't. So just stop that. I glared at him, but I knew he was right, at least partially. "So now to the important stuff," Leon continued when he realized he had won. "What do you want to do with it? We need to interrogate it. Maybe he'll talk. He looked young, and he was dumb enough to get caught. He might be dumb enough to talk." I answered. Leon nodded in agreement, and we stepped back toward my men who were still fighting to maintain control of the beast. "Take him to the dungeons," I commanded my men. "I want him alive and relatively unharmed." "Do you want to try and get information now?" Leon asked. "No. I want him to sit with this for a while. Some silence will do him some good. Maybe he'll want to talk more if we just leave him there. Just make sure he is secure." "You got it," Leon saluted. "And last thing, nobody is to talk about what we saw here today until we figure this out. Nobody says anything, not about his appearance, not about the red blood pack, Not their theories, nothing. If I hear that this has gotten out, there will be hell to pay, especially if it's even breathed in the direction of Grace. Understood? I growled. This seemed to surprise my men, but they all agreed. I had never had an issue with loyalty before. The creature shifted back into a man, and my men were able to seize him more easily than they had earlier. It was clear that the man could shift at will, so I didn't want my men to get too comfortable. Don't call me unless it's an emergency, I told Leon seriously. He nodded, his face solemn as he jumped in to help drag the man to the dungeons. I turned back to the house and made my way slowly back to where I knew Gracie was sleeping. Hopefully peacefully. I ran my hand tiredly through my hair. I hated how much I was beginning to need Grace. I could hardly believe that I had walked away from that monster's interrogation because I needed to be closer to Grace. Okay, there were a lot of reasons I walked away, but Grace seemed to reign my mind. I couldn't make sense of anything. I was outside Grace's room when a voice called my name, and I turned to see Sawyer sitting on the ground across from Grace's door. "What are you doing?" I asked with a frown. "You told me to look over Grace. She was sleeping, so I didn't want to disturb her, but I didn't want to go far, so alas, here we are." He answered, his eyes trained on his Rubik's Cube. "Who says alas?" "I heard a lot of commotion out there. Is everything okay?" Sawyer asked, ignoring my question. "Yeah, get your update from Leon, though. No one bother me unless it's an emergency. I'm beat," I answered honestly. Sawyer gave me a long look and nodded as he stood up.